Are obscure games interesting? Obviously, silly clickbait question. There's no inherent connection between a game's popularity, obscurity, whatever, and whether it's interesting or worth playing or not. But it is the best clickbait angle I could come up with. So, one thing I've been marinating on a lot in recent years is how selective I personally am with the games that I choose to spend my time on, the games that I become interested in. And there's two recent developments or things that I came across that made me think about this more and had me think, okay, I should make a video about this. First, my friend Björn, German YouTuber, great guy, you should follow him. I reference him a lot. He made this video literally a couple hours ago about sort of the paradoxical nature of, okay, we have this insane flood of new games constantly, especially in the indie space, and we have an unparalleled level of access to games because of the internet, and we're so much more aware of games from the past even that would have slipped under the cracks because now people can just make videos about them, write about them, blah blah blah. And yet, paradoxically, this creates sort of this decision anxiety or this pressure for games to like come to the surface. We may not have time or just space or capacity to check everything out, to give everything the time of day, and it may create a real scenario where a lot of things just that are worth playing, that are worth your time, may get lost in the shuffle. What's sort of interesting in this context is that Björn is way more open-minded about games than I am. If you know me, I'm very particular with my tastes. I'm very aware of my tastes. By comparison, he will, for example, be really into most JRPGs that get announced, that get released, even just based on like aesthetics and stuff, which is totally valid, right? That's not what the video is about. Whereas I'm much more strict, right? There's a lot of games that I've lost interest in over the years where I'm like, okay, I don't really have to spend time with this. And this ties into the second thing that I recently came across. There was this viral tweet, interaction bait type shit, whatever, where it asks, how have your tastes evolved over the years? And anyone who knows me can attest, I was a fucking different person 5 years ago. I was a different man. I would sort of try to play basically everything and like be interested in checking everything out. And we don't have to get into the reasons why that changed, right? That's not the topic of the video. But in the context of what I just talked about with games potentially slipping through the cracks, it does make you wonder, right? It does make you wonder, okay, maybe am I too strict with what I look for in games? Do I possibly write things off too quickly? XYZ. Two examples that I thought of with this. The first one was Blood Will Tell, the Osamu Tezuka PlayStation 2 adaptation game thing. Björn mentioned that in his video as a potential thing that you might not be aware of that might slip under the cracks, right? And I think it sort of supports that. That's probably the kind of game I haven't played it, right? But I'm pretty confident saying, okay, it sort of supports my stance. Do I really need to give this the time of day? Because it's a game that seems aesthetically and sort of narratively kind of cute, but I'm very skeptical that it actually blossoms into a mechanical experience that's somehow really compelling. Again, if you know me, I tend to be compelled by mechanically rich games that offer a lot of choices, that don't just devolve into like learning inputs or whatever, right? And this Tezuka game seems like the exact kind of thing that's just mechanically kind of barren. Realistically speaking, we might actually play it because Beach and Game Club. I'm gonna pop that on the screen here. The other game I was thinking about a little bit is Crow Country. That's a recent game that got a good amount of hype. It's a survival horror indie game with a great aesthetic. Like, the aesthetic is fucking on fleek. And I know, again, Björn was pretty excited for it, made a video about it, played it, reviewed it, and he hit it with the 6 out of 10 at the end, and basically said, yeah, as a survival horror game, this is not anything super special. It's very aesthetically driven, and that's kind of it. And that's cool. I don't want to dismiss that at all. But I am thinking, okay, would I not honestly get more out of replaying one of my favorites, for example? Again, if we're talking games that are so rich where you can just keep drawing more and more out of them and keep learning more from them, I feel like I'm not gonna get that from something like Crow Country. A point of comparison that I thought of to Crow Country would be Shenmue, right? Shenmue is a game that I surprisingly liked a lot. I do think it leverages the fact that it's this interactive space and this inhabitable space for the player at this insane level of detail. I think that is something unique, and it makes me wonder, okay, can indie games, with all the possibilities we have now, with how much more accessible the tech has gotten, I still feel like we can't quite reach that level. I mean, how could you? Like, if you have a 2-person team, 3-person team, single-person team, well, it's not a team, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm gonna be that compelled by that type of experience. So this leads me to my larger thesis for this video, or maybe even my view on art in general. I feel like once an idea is expressed, how much value is there in iterating on that idea? How much value is there in making another Shenmue-like, or another budget PS2 action game-like, or another Resident Evil-like, or whatever, right? Best way I can explain this is with my stance on movies versus serial stories. I feel like a serial story, like, you know, like a manga or a TV show or something, they try to be as entertaining as possible for as long as possible. That's kind of the goal, and that's kind of how I feel about a lot of games. Again, I know I keep referencing German shit. There's like subtitles and shit. Maybe that'll be useful. Basically, this German review film guy, right? He goes into why he doesn't like TV shows, and he sort of explained that in an ensemble cast in that kind of format, you could really easily endlessly iterate on the scenarios and on the possible constellations of things, right? You could pair up characters, you could take these characters away, add new characters, blah, blah, blah. Like, it basically writes itself. And the question is that interesting, right? I feel like ultimately you shoot yourself in the foot with that approach if your goal is to just be as entertaining as possible for as long as possible. Inevitably, all you're doing is like iterating on existing things and living in the shadow of other works, right? I think that's why the format of a movie, it lends itself much more to an artist saying, okay, I'm gonna do something only I can do, it's this very self-contained thing, and then we get out of there, right? And I want more games to start from that perspective. I think that's sort of my overall thesis. A recent positive example maybe is something like Penny's Big Breakaway. Obviously, it's a 3D platformer, it's very linear, right? It's on the surface level, it's nothing you haven't seen before, but then this yo-yo mechanic, where you can freely aim where you throw your yo-yo, and that has like its whole momentum system and all that shit. That has so many implications for how the game works and for how you can traverse the levels, and so much room for optimization. And it's genuinely something that I haven't really seen before in another game. It's something that genuinely felt physically new and weird and different to do, right? And I think that's valuable. This is gonna be a really weird example, right? But I'm thinking about stuff like Metroid Dread, which on the surface, not an original game at all, right? Usually what people praise about it is that it has really good pacing, it's really fast, it's really smooth, feels really good. But then also, the big elephant in the room for me is the bosses. The boss fights in Dread are shockingly great. They have all these different bullet patterns and all these like spots to move that have very meaningful implications. You have bosses that move through the entire arena. It feels very dynamic and very active. And it makes me think, how the fuck do we have so many of this type of game? And yet most of them are like, I cannot think of many games that are as good as Dread in that regard. I think Hollow Knight is not as good. I think none of the Igavanias are as good as Dread in that specific way. Like if I'm thinking 2D action boss fights, it's It's Alien Soldier, it's Dread, and it's like Cuphead, right? Surely there's like other examples, maybe the Shmup genres and stuff, but like, why isn't there way more games on that level? That's something that really gets you thinking a little bit, right? Once you start realizing that. And obviously, I don't know, like Dread surprises me because it feels like it shouldn't be as good as it is in that way, and I don't know why it turned out the way it did. But I want to think it's okay, it's because the developers actually fucking thought about it. They didn't want to just make a game that's carried by the fact, oh, it's a new Metroidvania, it's another one of those, right? They actually pushed themselves a little bit. To tie this whole thing up a little bit, I know all of this seems a little unrelated, disconnected, whatever, but I'm going somewhere with this, let me cook. I feel like the time we spend on games, maybe not even just playing games, but just thinking about games, paying attention to games, blah, 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 is disproportionate to how much we'll actually like the games in the end, or how much we actually draw out of the games for ourselves, for our fucking lives, right? Personally, again, to go back to the taste evolution thing, right? I've overcome my completion anxiety. I'm okay with not playing every little cute 6 out of 10. I think life might be a little too short for that. That's just me. That's just me. That's my mantra. I think something like Rain World is important in this conversation. I haven't talked about it much on this channel. I probably should. Great game. It's a game that didn't get its due at the time, and then has since seen a bit of a resurgence. There's a lot of people singing its praises now and talking about it, and that's great. And basically acknowledging, yes, this was an underappreciated masterpiece, and people just didn't get it at the time. The problem is that I still run into situations where I will recommend it to people, and they will think, well, it's like a 2D Metroidvania. Like, I know it's like better than what its reputation initially was, right? But, I don't know. So, what am I trying to say with this? I'm saying the average person doesn't really have the critical eye to see why Rain World is not just another 2D Metroidvania, right? They haven't honed their palette, or this sounds kind of mean. Like, I really don't mean it that way. This is like a complete neutral statement, but like, their like understanding of games enough to see, oh, actually this is different. If I looked a little more into how this game works sort of under the surface, I would understand there's a lot here that I'm not gonna get out of other games at all. That's also, you know, it's funny, like, this was not in my notes, this was just occurring to me. I saw a lot of people, for example, compare Animal Well and Rain World, and they're not similar at all. There's absolutely zero crossover between those games, right? And I feel like if we looked at the games a little more closely, we would notice that. It really is a problem of boiling down the discourse to the most easily recognizable qualities, right? Instead of actually looking at games from this foundational level. And again, maybe you can't blame the audience, because a lot of games are happy to not innovate on the foundational level, right? They're happy to, like I said earlier, to just iterate. And again, for example, I've been a little bit of a classic survival horror, I don't want to say hater, but I still like a lot of those games, like a good amount. But I do think this formula, for example, is pretty limited. There's a pretty hard ceiling, in my opinion, on how far you can push that. There's been this recent crop of many new classic survival horror games that, at least in their credits, they do try to echo games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. We've left the Amnesia era. That's good, but they're not even reaching the, in my opinion, pretty limited ceiling of a game like RE-Make. And again, for obvious reasons, it's way fewer people working on it, they don't have the same resources, obviously, right? But I think the mission here then should be to recognize, oh, maybe this is not a route worth pursuing in the first place, right? Maybe I should develop my taste a little more and see how we can find other mechanics or other innovations that lead us to higher places, right? So this is my conclusion. I think we need better metrics to decide if a game is interesting. I think that's really the thing. I think we can safely be a little more selective with the types of game we find interesting, and then naturally the better stuff will rise to the top. Obviously, that's not a catch-all, that's not a very concrete solution to anything, And surely we're gonna have other rain worlds, right? We're gonna have more rain world situations in the future where a game doesn't get the respect it deserves, people don't get it, it goes over people's heads, blah blah blah. That's going to happen. But again, life is short. And it's not something I'm personally super stressed about. Yeah, that's all I have on this topic. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna do like an update video soon, sort of on what the fuck is going on with this channel. There's a thing I really wanted to upload before I do this, and then I had the idea for this, and I was like, okay, let's just fucking get it out. Okay, bye from the West Coast.